Welcome to the Find the Way podcast. In this show, we will try to explore what is happening in emerging markets and how entrepreneurs, investors, and communities are simply finding the way to make phenomenal things happen, regardless how volatile the environment may sometimes seem. Hello. I'm super excited to present to you today to Victor Noguera. Victor is the co-founder of Flat.mx, which is a property tech company that is transforming the buying and selling of real estate in Mexico. Victor did his degree in industrial engineering at the Polytechnic University of Catalonia and his MBA at Berkeley-Haas in California. Prior to Flat.mx, he was serving as a director at BCG, the Boston Consulting Group in New York and Barcelona. Together with Bernardo Cordero, they co-founded a seed fund that invested in Mexico. They also acted as an investor in Quona Capital, a venture capital fund that invests in financial technology services in emerging markets. In 2019, along with Bernardo, he co-founded the platform Flat.mx, and we're going to dive deeper into their story right here. Super cool, Victor, that you were able to join the show. You're living in Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City, but now back in Spain, your homeland. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you.
And so you're right now in the Canary Islands, right?
I'm in the Canary Islands. That's right. Spending some vacation with family here while working a little bit as well.
A little bit working, yeah. And now you're currently based in Mexico City. And how long have you been living there?
That's right. Yeah. So I'm originally from Barcelona, from Spain, and I lived in the US for a while. And in 2017, I had a background of consulting, and I decided to do something else. I had been working in the financial services industry for a while, for 8 years, and I liked tech. I knew a lot of financial services, so I said, "Hey, let's do something in fintech." And then in 2017, I moved to Mexico to start a small seed fund that invested in fintech called STARTegy. And yeah, that we started with that. And, once you move to a new country and the more you know people, it's difficult to leave because you have your network and everything, and it's easier to continue. And then in 2019, that's when we started Flat. So that's company number 2 in Mexico. We'll see what happens later.
Cool. And if we go a little bit back over there, you lived in the US. Did you do your MBA over there and then just stayed within the country, and then you end up in Mexico?
That's correct. So I started at Boston Consulting Group in Barcelona, a consulting firm. Then did my MBA, and that's where I met my current co-founder, my co-founder as well in the fund that we started in 2016. So yeah, I went to Berkeley and did a quick internship at Google. I thought it was super cool, but went back to consulting after that. That time I went to New York, so lived in New York for 5 years. And then randomly, I ran into Bernardo, my co-founder, at a restaurant in Mexico. And he was at the time running a company called Linio, which is a large e-commerce firm. He was one of the founders, one of the first e-commerce platforms in Latin America. And at that time, he was in the process of selling the company. So, I mean, I met him at the perfect time, right? Like he wanted to leave the company.
Absolutely.
We're aligning, right? So we run into each other. We had a similar vision that fintech was going to grow in Mexico, and that's when we decided to start the small seed fund.
Seed fund. And how big was the fund?
It was a very small one. It was like $2.1 million US dollars. So we raised from a few high net worth individuals. We wanted to test the hypothesis that that early stage in Mexico was possible, but it required a lot of effort and a stronger ecosystem. So the idea of that fund was that we were going to help the entrepreneur with funding, with HR, with methodologies of lean startup and so on. And
So the
actually,
playbook that you got from BCG, basically, that you're gonna go
exactly,
and now test on a smaller organization and see that can that
exactly,
scale that model.
exactly. And we were investing at pre-PowerPoint stage, so there's nothing, but nothing exists before that. And we invested in several entrepreneurs that the first check was when they were still at previous jobs, so they haven't started the company yet.
For real, that's super
Um,
cool.
and I think that was part of the success of the fund, because we were able to tap into really good entrepreneurs and have meaningful stakes at the company at a very early stage. And if the company grows and you're at the very beginning, then the multiples tend to be interesting. That was part of
Absolutely.
the success.
And then you ran that fund for actively when was the whole amount allocated?
Yeah, everything was allocated end of 2018. So it took us a couple of years to invest everything. And yeah, we're still managing it because we still have several investments. We have divested on some companies, but we still have the portfolio active. So the divestment portion is going to take a while.
Of course, of course. And now in retrospect, few years later, can you say that how was your initial hypothesis on early stage funding in Mexico at that time, 2016? Now Mexico is extremely booming. It's becoming one of the hottest hubs and ecosystems of the tech world
Mhm.
overall. So how was it in at that time, and how has it evolved in your point of
Yeah,
view?
what I would say, the tech ecosystem in Mexico hasn't been there for a long time. It probably started with the Linio Mafia, with my co-founder who started Linio. Um, it was a great school for a lot of people. There's a study by Endeavor that studied like how many people from different companies started startups, and probably there were about 100 people ex Linio that started a company after being in Linio. So I think it all started around 2012. So when we started 2016, 17, we're probably the second wave of startups. Um,
Hmm.
the timing of the fund was like amazing because we started at the best time possible, right?
Why?
Of course, there was a peak in 2021, as everyone knows. And we thought at the time we were smart, but the reality was that the timing was we were lucky with the timing, and and we didn't know at that time, though. And I think now there's another opportunity. Valuations are decent now after sort of the bubble burst burst um, a year ago. And so I think now it's a great time to continue investing. Not a lot of people start a company, but the ones who start a company are the ones that I think have a very clear idea of what they want to do and so on. So you were asking about sort of the hypothesis that we had in 2016, 17 were right or not. So we were right on some things, we were wrong on other things. The things we were wrong were that entrepreneurs need help. So we built a whole
Mm-hmm.
structure on marketing services and HR services and tech services and da da da. And the reality is that the people who are really going to start a company and know what they're doing, they don't need your help. Right? So we moved out from being a super hands-on seed fund to
Hmm.
being a more hands-off and picking the right entrepreneur, as opposed to finding an entrepreneur that needs a lot of help, that needs us,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
try to groom that entrepreneur. Right? I think there's enough talent in Mexico, Latin America in general, um, and a lot of these people don't need our help. Like they know much better what they're doing than what we do. Right. So that was a hypothesis that's actually, it was interesting to find out. And it makes our job much easier, right? Because we don't have to be that hands-on, and we can spend the
Absolutely. And
time
how
on
long
other
did it
things.
take for you to learn on that lesson? So obviously you reflected and you were able to still pivot on your strategy in a way. But how long did it take for you to realize this?
It was midway. So we had invested about 1 million of the two,
Hmm.
and it was midway, about a year into.
Okay. And from there, if you go for the ones that you validated correctly, that you were right, would you be able to elaborate on those?
Yeah. So I think one of the hypotheses or the thesis that we had was that we don't need unicorns in Mexico to be a
Hmm.
successful fund. I think it's better to target for 100, 200 million exits than to target the unicorn. We were
Yeah.
targeting businesses that they're not deep tech, right? Like in Mexico, I don't think the next Google or the next Facebook or the next OpenAI will be started in Mexico. However, there are a lot of like basic needs that are still needed in Mexico. Things like food, things like shelter, things like clothing. So all the basic things that people need are still something needed. Um, so most of the businesses that we see are successful in Mexico are more business model innovations rather than deep tech innovations,
Yeah.
um, which makes it slightly easier to start a company, right? But at the same time, you're not going to become a unicorn with a business model innovation, right? If you want to become a unicorn or become like a super huge company that's super scalable and so on, you essentially need to build a new technology, which is not what's happening in Latin America in general. So I think we were right on that one. Um, and, and so we only had one write-off, out of the entire portfolio.
Hmm.
Um,
Out of how
and
many?
out of five,
Okay.
which I would say it's actually a pretty good ratio. Um, and actually we were targeting for that, right? We were targeting for a balance of risk and upside, right? We were not
Yeah.
looking for a big upside, but at the same time, we didn't want to bet on the super risky ones either, right? So finding that balance, I think, is the right thing. And
Yes. If I go back a little bit, what you just said over there, that there is a lot of business model innovations that are being brought into Mexican market and Latin American market that are able to create a great impact, but they're not going towards unicorn status or those mega exits, so to speak. And the state of deep tech is not quite advanced yet. And you mentioned there that's not happening in Latin America overall versus being more of these business model innovations that are taking place. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What do you mean that the status of deep tech is not as advanced versus to these more of a business model innovations that have a potential for 100 million to 200 million exits?
yeah, so let's go back a few years, and let's say, where was the cloud invented in the US, right? Like Amazon Web Services started the whole thing, and then Google Cloud Platform and all the other ones came after that. That technology was invented in the US or in some other Europe, China, etc. Right? In Mexico, we used that technology, of course, but we didn't invent that technology, right? So like what we
Mhm.
thought was what we're doing in Mexico is implemented that technology to enable a new way of producing a product or service, right? Same thing with blockchain, right? So blockchain was not invented in Mexico, of course. Are we using blockchain? Yes, of course. And there's a great example. Bitso is a great company from Mexico, which is a sort of a wallet and sort of a bank as well, that's using blockchain and Bitcoin and that technology, but it wasn't invented by that company, right? So we find
Yeah.
a use case to use that technology, but the technology itself is not invented in Mexico.
Yeah. Hmm. And how long do you think that this status is going to remain? Meaning that when do you see that time horizon wise? I know these are going to be wild predictions and it's super hard to predict that when the Latin American market and Mexican market is able to transform and move towards more deep tech, solid innovations versus just mimicking a lot of the things that are being done in, let's say, the Western world. And now you're bringing more of these solutions and providing better service to people in need in Latin America. When do you think that it's going to turn around that, let's say, some of the Western worlds are going to start using the deep tech innovations that are coming out of Latin America?
So honestly, and I don't want to be pessimistic, but I think it's going to take an extremely long time. Why? Because I think the changes needed for this to happen take a long time. I think one of the key elements for this to happen is having universities that are world known, right? In the US and the Western world, and even in Asia, there are great universities where a lot of research is being done.
Hmm.
But I don't think they're like world-class level universities in Mexico in general. I mean, maybe there are some fields where there are institutions that are world known, but in general, people don't think
Yeah.
of Mexico as the place where they would do their PhD. Right?
Yeah.
So universities need to be built or need to be improved, and of course, that's not going to happen overnight. That
Yeah.
takes a very long time and a lot of effort from the government as well. Right? The government needs to believe that this is the right strategy. Otherwise, it's not going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. And now if we turn the direction towards Flat.mx, your current project, the second project you started now in Mexico with the same co-founder that you already met in Berkeley. That was
Mm-hmm.
right.
That's correct.
And you started the fund in 2016, 2 years it took for you to allocate a couple $1 million. And Flat.mx evolved. Can you share what's going on? Why does it matter? What is Flat.mx and why anybody should give a damn?
Yeah. So Flat, it's a residential real estate super app. So we solve all the problems related to buying and selling a home.
Yeah.
The problem that we realized that we saw in the market was one, it takes a very long time to sell a home in Mexico. On average, it takes more than a year for a typical seller to sell a home.
Sorry, what did you say? A year?
A year or even more. So
You're
year,
kidding me.
no, that's real. That's real.
That
Uh,
is a lot of time.
and why is that? Why is that? Um, the main reason is the processes are super bureaucratic. So finding a notary and finding a bank that can finance and all the legal paperwork and the public registry and so on can take for ages. But at the same time, there are two other problems that are big. One is the data in the market is not public. So people don't really know how much your home is worth, which means
So,
that,
sorry, what do you mean that it's not public? Why don't you just see when you go and walk on the streets? You have multiple real estate brokers that on their window. You should see the prices that they're selling homes, or no?
but
This is what I'm
there's a
used
big
to in
difference.
most part of the world.
But there's a big difference between what people want to sell it for and what people actually sell it for. So
Like, true.
publishing values can be 15 to 20% higher than transactional values. So there's a big
And that
difference.
information is not available, that the completed sale basically, and that's not. It's very
it
hidden.
technically is public. That's why like you go to the public registry and you register your home. But the reality is that if you want to build a database of transactional values, you have to go to every single registry on every single city, take a book that's in some shelf, make a copy of that, digitize that. So like essentially it's useless,
And
right? Like
nobody does it. It's
nobody
so
does it, and
much
it's super
time.
expensive.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So data is not public, so people don't really know how much their home is worth. And how do people price it? Well, my neighbor sold it for 3 million pesos. My home is much nicer than my neighbor's, of course. So I'm going to sell it for 4 million, right? And what happens is that people have like super high expectations of what the home is going to be sold for. And it takes them a year to figure out, oh no, like I was probably wrong, but my home is worth 4 million pesos. It's probably worth
Yeah,
3
yeah.
million pesos, right? So it takes a while for people to figure out the right price. Then the second big problem is that brokers don't have to be certified to be a broker. So tomorrow, you,
Hmm.
Eric, you can go to Mexico and become a broker.
With my
Uh,
phenomenal Spanish, I can come into the market and just go to the wild
ex-
west of properties in
exactly,
Mexico.
exactly. So what happens is that there are about 80,000 brokers in Mexico, out of which less than 20,000 are actually part of a network of brokers, part of
Hmm.
an association. So 60,000 of these brokers are completely informal. What does that mean? That they don't know how to actually sell a home. They don't know the basics of marketing, the basics of legal, basics of taxes, etc. So usually what happens is that if I want to sell a home, I would just go to my cousin, who by the way is a broker, or my uncle who's a broker, and because that's the person I trust, right? And I would go to them thinking that, hey, they're going to sell my home, but the reality is that they don't know exactly how to sell a home. And then they figure that out after 6 months, and they start hiring a professional broker, right? So it takes a lot of time, not only bureaucracy, but just figuring out how to sell your home. It takes a very long
Yeah.
time. And then the other thing is access to credit is actually super hard in Mexico as well. The traditional private banks, they only serve about like 20% of the population.
Hmm.
And about 50% of the population use the government bank. It's called Infonavit. So thanks to the government, a lot of people can buy homes, but it's still, the government process is still cumbersome as well. Anyway, so we have all these problems, right? So data is a problem. Informality of brokers is another problem. Bureaucracy is another problem. Access to credit is another problem. So we said, hey, we have to solve this. And the only way to solve this is by just building the ecosystem where transactions happen. Right? And that's why we built a proprietary data set. We built a credit institution. We built a marketplace that has all the data verified. And we became the ecosystem where brokers can actually transact in our platform.
So the brokers can transact. You're visualizing all of the listings. You provide all, let's say, the most transparent information about the market that is available currently, and then the closing of the sale, when, for instance, the consumer is getting the credit line from through you, then does the validation with the notary happen there in the platform as well, or how does the rest of the transaction all the way to finalization happen?
Yeah, so we're engaged from the beginning towards end to end, right? So we're
Yeah.
engaged in the entire transaction from the very beginning of engaging with the seller and publishing the property till the very end where there's a signature in the notary.
Yeah.
What we always thought was, hey, there are a lot of things that can be automated. There's a lot of like operational stuff that with technology we can automate. But there's still going to be a component that's going to be emotional, right? Like people are worried that they're selling at the right price, and they're
Yeah,
worried that, I don't know, they're buying a home that probably doesn't have the right paperwork, and they're buying some sort of problem, right? All that emotional thing, it's super difficult to automate. So we let the agent take care of that. But
yeah,
we enable the agent with all the technology to be able to be efficient and focus more on the emotional part and forget about all the operational part, which, by the way, they don't like to do.
yeah,
So from the very beginning, we're focused on capturing the client, digitizing the property, publishing the property on our marketplace and all the other marketplaces in the market. We sort of do all the marketing as well. Then all the visits to a home are done by our agents. Um, we have all the documentation, all the legal paperwork. We have a legal team
yeah,
that helps with the closing. And then on top of that, we have all the ancillary products, right? Credit. We also do renovations if somebody wants to renovate the home, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So at some point we'll do insurance as well. So we're doing everything that's needed to close the transaction in a speedy way and in a convenient way.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And if we look at the status of Flat.mx, you're still relatively nascent firm, being able to move forward very, very rapidly. Now you're roughly 200 employees. Correct me if I'm wrong. You raised 25 million round. When was that? You raised?
So we raised our Series A in September 2021.
Okay. And are you already profitable, or are you still keep investing
Not,
in
not yet,
in
not yet. We
not
continue
yet?
investing. We continue
Yeah.
investing. I mean, a part of what we're doing is also growing aggressively. So one of the things that's happening in Mexico is the economy is booming, right? So with nearshoring, there's a huge opportunity. The peso is as strong as ever. And a lot of factories are being set in Mexico. So that's helping the economy a lot. So we want to take advantage of those tailwinds and continue investing and continue growing through the entire country. So that's part of the reason why we're still not
Yeah. And
profitable investing a lot in marketing and technology.
did you also make an acquisition lately to enhance your capabilities? Was it tech acquisition or?
That's correct. Yes. So we acquired an advanced analytics company. As I mentioned at the beginning, data is a core thing of what we do and providing transparency of prices.
Yeah.
So that there was a company that was actually one of our providers at that time called Intellimetrica that had access to all the transactional data set that we were looking for. And essentially, they have contracts with all the major banks, and they have access through the banks to that data, right? Because these banks have mortgages, and mortgages require appraisals, and all these appraisals are done by Intellimetrica. So that's why we are able to gather a lot of the data there. And then on top of that, it's one of the strongest data analytics teams in the country. And we wanted to invest heavily in becoming a referent in terms of data analytics as well. So we purchased this company end of last year and developing a lot of data products in the market, right? So we want to become again that center of information. So releasing a lot of reports and
Yeah.
valuation tools and things like that for not only consumers but also for companies.
And are you allowed to say that what was the acquisition price?
I'm not allowed to say that.
Too bad, too bad. But you could always ask, it's like there's still a lot of ambiguity on mergers and acquisitions when it comes to Latin America. This is still, of course, in the private markets overall around the world, but it's still
Yeah, but what I'm going to say is, of course, it's always cheaper than the value that you're going to extract. Otherwise, I wouldn't buy something. But one of the important things in the transaction was that the founders would get equity in Flat, so that all the
Hmm.
incentives are aligned. So it was a combination of cash and
And stock. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then, would you be able to share a little bit about the current challenges that other challenges that you're facing in the prop tech market? Prop tech is one of the booming verticals of Latin America overall. And what are you seeing that where will this develop? Not only in Mexico, but in Latin America, that what will happen in the next 5 to 10 years in the world of prop tech? Do you have any things to share that you're envisioning, or it can be related to what Flat.mx is dreaming about?
yeah. I mean, what we're dreaming about is that a transaction is going to be as easy as clicking a button from the sofa of your home, right? Uh,
Yeah,
that's our vision. We want to continue working until we can fulfill that vision. I think a lot of
yeah.
things need to happen for that to be a reality. Um, the first thing is technology, but I think technology is already there to be able to do that, right? You're able to tour home in 3D, like you could use virtual reality glasses. I mean, pretty much you can recreate a world in your home. So the technology is there. I think what we're missing is part of the problems that I was already mentioning at the beginning of the session today. Um, so still for example, a deed cannot be signed digitally in Mexico.
Hmm.
So we need to do a lot of work to be able to have a digital notary.
Yeah.
And so all these sort of legal process of registry, notaries, and so on need to be significantly improved to be able to do that from home. But the most important thing, I think this is something that's going to happen in the next 2-3 years. That's going to happen, right? And we'll be able to buy homes also using blockchain and all of that, right? And the public registry is going to be on the blockchain. So all that technology is going to exist, and there's a clear path towards that happening. I think the biggest barrier that we're going to face is consumer behavior. So it's really hard for somebody to buy a home without actually touching it. So
Yeah.
people still have the feeling that they want to go see it, touch it, smell it, go with your partner, with your dog, with your uncle, with your parents.
You
And
gotta live it, you gotta feel it, you gotta envision
exactly,
yourself when you go there and see what your future is gonna look like in this new beautiful place of ours, you know?
exactly. But not only that, but it's part of building trust. So one of the things that we say at Flat is that we're solving a trust issue, right? When you're buying a home, you don't know if you're buying it from somebody who has done things that are not right, whether like the legal documents have some sort of issue, whether the building has some structural issue. And remember, there are earthquakes in Mexico, so you have to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
realize that. So part of the visiting home is not only to actually see it with your own eyes, because you can see it in pictures and you can see it with a 3D tour, but it's actually the process of getting to know the owner, getting to know the broker that's helping you. So that process of building that trust is something that it's going to be super hard to overcome.
It's gonna take a lot of time, but it's possible, but I think that if we narrow down it for, let's say, not as big examples, like buying a house or buying an apartment, if just for renting. I lived in the Netherlands roughly for 5 years, and I lived in multiple different cities, and I fell in love with a company called Holland's Stay that had huge apartment complexes all around the Netherlands, multiple different cities, great quality, and you could do everything online, and I started to trust the organization so much that after the first place, I just booked the places with my girlfriend without ever seeing it because we trusted the organization to get things done so well that, you know, if it's Holland to stay listing, we can trust it. We can go no worries. Everything works so smoothly, and they always delivered. So, and I think that this is trusted. What you're trying to build, it's going to take a longer period of time because it's one of the greatest financial decisions for any household. But it can happen if we
Yep,
take that example
it
only
can
from
happen.
renting.
Yeah, I agree.
You know,
And that's going to happen. But as you said, there are two issues why this hasn't happened yet. One is, as you said, it's one of the biggest investments in your life. If you make a mistake, it's not you made a mistake for a few days and you're renting a place
yeah,
that, hey, I can move somewhere else. Like you bought a house, right? Like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
a huge investment. And then the second thing is, um, you only buy a house in Mexico every 20, 25 years, right? So it's not
that is
something
the average. So it's very
that is the
long holding period. Yeah, yeah.
very long holding periods. Yeah. So if you look in the US, like 10, 15 years. But in Mexico, people tend to stay much longer in their homes. And there's not that repeatability. So you only have one chance to get it right. Uh, so, so it's difficult to build the trust only with one single transaction, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's why a lot of what we're doing is, making sure that all the information is right, making sure that the customer experience is correct from the beginning to the end, so that there's some sort of word of mouth and people
Yeah.
talk about Flat, about their experience. But building that brand with one transaction every 20 years is actually a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, if we go then as a last theme to a little bit to Victor, to you as an individual, you're still living in Mexico. Is that the place to be for the rest of your life, or what is going on? Do you still crave to go back to Europe, or what's happening with you?
Look, Spain and Barcelona specifically, I still consider that my hometown.
Yeah,
And my wife is also from Barcelona. And to be honest, quality of life in Europe is amazing. So I always say that I will go back to Spain and retire in Spain. The reality is that in Mexico, there are a lot of things to do still.
to get
So
done. Yeah, yeah,
that there are huge opportunities. A lot of, as we were discussing at the beginning, a lot of basic needs still need to be covered. So I think the impact that I can have starting companies, it's much greater in Mexico and Latin America than in Spain. But man, quality of life here is amazing. Like you should see the views from the apartment I'm in right now. Like I can see the ocean from here,
yeah.
and other things as well. No, healthcare works. The government, you can like it or not, but it actually works. So in general, public services work really well. Um, so yeah, you'll see me at some point back in Spain. The question is when.
That is a great way to put it. And if we then look at it, there's a lot of these problems that needs to be solved, not only within Flat.mx, always when you go with the roller coaster of a startup, you have continuous headaches going on. So what is like basically keeping you up at night, if any? What are the biggest problems that you're trying to solve right now with the current projects?
Yeah. So the one, I mean, specifically at Flat.mx, our big objective for this year is get to break even, right? So I think we're in a path to get to break even, and that's the focus of the entire organization. What are the things that we're doing is, of course, becoming much more efficient with operations. At the same time, doing a lot more cross-selling, right? So making sure that in the
Yeah,
transaction, we're not only selling the home, but we are also selling credit, we're selling a renovation, potentially insurance, etc. So that we can increase the value of that transaction.
yeah,
And at some point, what we are going to be doing is also extending the relationship with the customer, right? So today we're very focused on improving the transaction. And the second step is going to be extending that relationship with a customer. So that's the focus for this year. I think part of the things that I like about the industry today is that the destiny it's on us pretty much. Of course, we have competitors, but the market is so big that if
Yeah,
we do
yeah,
things right, we're going to be successful. And if we're not successful, it's because we did something wrong, right? But not
yeah,
because we
yeah, yeah.
were unlucky or something like that. I think that's one of the great things about Latin America in general. Given there's much less competition, the uh, lucky component it's much less important than the execution.
That's well put. And then, as a very final theme, is that would you be able to describe some of more of the discrepancies, the differences that you see in Mexico compared to Spain in the world of tech? What is the status? Europe is more advanced in multiple different ways, but what would be outside of these things that yes, the institutions are more advanced. We have been investing a lot more technology into technology companies for multiple years in Europe and Spain. Things are more developed compared to Mexico. What other things that are you seeing? For instance, if we talk about the level of talent, is there any differences that you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. So talent is a big difference. So I think in Spain, we're talking about universities. I think there's a good level of universities in Spain, technical universities as well. And I think, to be honest, talent in Spain is it's quite cheap for the value that you get. Um,
Yeah.
so one of the things that we have done, for example, in Flat was setting up a center of technology in Buenos Aires. In fact, we don't
Mhm.
have any operations or anything in Argentina, but we thought that the talent in Argentina was outstanding, and probably the
Yeah.
best in the region. I would have set it up in Spain, but time differences are also always a bit difficult to manage. So Argentina was a great option for us. So talent is a big difference. What I would say is the type of businesses and the strategies that you need to follow in Spain are very different than in Mexico. Mexico is a huge country. Um, and you probably don't need to go somewhere else to be successful. And we have on purpose decided not to expand anywhere else outside of Mexico, because we still like less than 1% of market share in
Yeah.
Mexico. Uh, we have a lot of room to grow. Whereas in Spain, the market is much smaller, and you have to expand to other countries rather quickly. Portugal, France, a lot of Spanish companies are going to Latin America and doing expansion, especially in the proptech space and highly regulated spaces like a fintech space. It's super hard to move to a new country.
Yeah.
Um, so, so you have to have a business if you want to be successful, and that's my opinion. If you want to be successful in Spain, you need to have a business model that actually, uh, it's either big enough to stay in Spain, or it's a business model that it's easy to expand to other countries. Right?
Hmm.
And at the same time, the types of businesses that are being sorted in Spain are probably not solving basic needs as we were discussing earlier.
Yeah.
Mexico, like half of the population don't have a bank account. Um, so those like super basic needs that in Spain, like 99% of people
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
bank account. Um, access to food, access to basic needs, access to shelter, as we were saying, are still problems that need to be solved in Mexico. The companies that you see in Spain, they're solving like real problems, but all the basic needs are already covered.
Are covered. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks, Victor, so much for sharing your views on the differences between Spain and Mexico, the state of prop tech, and the problems that you're trying to solve and you're on a great growth trajectory and going fast forward. And let's keep hoping and dreaming that you're able to make that dream a reality. That everybody can just sit on their couches and just do a couple clicks, and they have a new place. So thanks a lot, Victor, for joining today, and super excited to see you also in person, hopefully very, very soon.
Yeah, no, definitely. And thanks again for the time, and congrats on the initiative. I think it's a great thing. Sort of talking to entrepreneurs and spreading the word. I think it's something super useful, not only for us, for the ecosystem in general. And let's talk in the next few years and see if our vision was right or not.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's always it's always great to look back and see that where the hypothesis is correct, or did something happen along the way. Super cool. Thanks, Victor.
Thank you. Have a good one.